You're listening to WPKN 89.5 FM in Bridgeport and streaming online at wpkn.org. Reporting and supporting what matters, this is CT Examiner Weekly.
Louis the Coin Colavecchio minted counterfeit slot machine tokens, hitting Mohegan Sun, Foxwoods, and the big names in Las Vegas and Atlantic City, grossing $4 million with the scam. But who was the coin and how did he do it? I'm Greg Stroud, editor of CT Examiner, and that's the topic of today's roundtable.
And I'm your host, Brian Scott Smith, and joining myself and Greg in the studio, a panel of expert reporters to discuss this incredible story. Welcome to you all. It reads like the plot of a Hollywood movie, but it's a real story spanning across the nation's gambling resorts and even through Europe that has left a lasting legacy on the casino gaming industry and forever changing it. Joining us to talk more about Louis the Coin Colavecchio is Andy Thibault, a contributing editor to CT Examiner and co-author of You Thought It Was More, New Adventures of the World's Greatest Counterfeiter. Plus, Larry Henry, former political editor at the Las Vegas Sun and a recognized authority on organized crime, now senior reporter for gambling.com. And CT Examiner reporter Ally LeMaster also joins us. Andy, I'm going to turn to you first. Set the scene a little more for our listeners about Louis the Coin. Who was he?
Well, Louis was a business administration graduate of Providence College, but in his younger days, he sold fake cashmere sweaters to Irish bars in Boston, and he was a master counterfeiter and genius in metallurgy.
I was going to say, because looking and reading the book, this man is a genius, an absolute genius, now sadly gone. I mean, he passed away a few years ago. He became a friend of yours, didn't he?
Yes. Around 2002, I published a column about him with the help of retired State Police Detective Sergeant Jerry Longo, in which I noted how Louis melted down and re-engineered the tokens, and he wasn't a rat. And he really liked that I said he wasn't a rat. So he called me up and he came to visit me.
We're going to come back to you in just a moment. I just want to quickly bring Larry in as well. Larry, talk to us about your involvement in this, because it's not just a tenuous link. There is a link as to why we've got you on this and your sort of like understanding and involvement in this story.
Well, what really makes it interesting, in fact, it reminds me of a New England novelist named George V. Higgins, who wrote The Friends of Eddie Coyle. That sort of New England underworld was transplanted to Vegas through Louis at places that don't really exist anymore in Las Vegas. The old mob world of Las Vegas it no longer exists, including at one of the places where he was really, where the New England crime family had a lot of influence in the mid-50s. At the Dunes. The Dunes is gone now. It's since been imploded. The Bellagio stands where the Dunes once did. But, there was a different era. You go across the country now, there are more than 1,000 casinos. Sports betting is legal in almost every state. So it's a different environment now. Back then, before AC came on board in Atlantic City, and even then, Las Vegas was the place. It was the place where Louis and his crew from New England would go out to gamble, and a completely different environment, and that's the connection. But every outfit had Las Vegas was an open city. The New England mob was involved. Chicago outfit was involved. Detroit was involved. So each mob outfit had its resort, and with the New England crew, a lot of that was at the Dunes.
So Larry, you were a political reporter in Nevada. And at that time, could you be a political reporter without knowing or coming into contact with the mafia? Was it just part of the fabric of sort of the state and the city or the business?
It was all intertwined. Politics, gaming, the mob, all that was intertwined in Nevada. It's really funny because you look at the way I was press secretary for a governor named Bob Miller. His dad ran the Riviera and Slots of Fun. Slots of Fun's still there, by the way. Riviera's gone. And, his dad had been involved in Chicago and came down to Las Vegas. So there were a lot of interconnected elements, political and mob related. But, keep in mind the casinos in Las Vegas in those days, over time, corporations were allowed to come in and take control of casinos. Late 60s, Howard Hughes came in and bought a lot from the mob. Corporations were allowed to come in. Every shareholder didn't have to be vetted by the Gaming Control Board, by regulators in Nevada. That changed the environment. But at the time we're talking about with Louis, a lot of those casinos weren't corporate owned. And so, you had a lot of political interconnections going on that opened the door for a lot of these mob people to get high positions in casinos.
So Andy, could you explain to us the scam? And could you kind of give us a sense of if the mafia is in part, if organized crime is sort of in bed with the business side, why are they also in bed with the side that seems to be ripping them off?
Well, as I understand it, there's a culture where everybody steals from everybody.
So this is the case of Louis the coin has been, I guess he would have had to get permission from someone to probably rip off the casino.
Well, Louis was under the protection of legendary New England mob boss Raymond Patriarca, and they certainly didn't tell Raymond everything that went on in his offices or his bar, the S&S bar, or Sherwood Manufacturing in Providence, and I'm pretty confident they didn't tell him what they were doing at the dunes.
So, but the scam was, so they manufacture these fake tokens.
Well, it's not it's Louis and his tool and die makers. He imported a 2-ton press from Italy, and then he would go on his own. But as Joe Broadmeadow, retired East Providence captain, has said, if they didn't give Raymond his sweet taste, they would have not been alive any longer.
So I think something that was really striking from reading this was that it seemed like police and judges seemed to almost admire his crimes in a way. Can you talk a little bit about why that was, what kind of sway he had?
Well, Jerry Longo, the cop who arrested him in Connecticut, he admired his talent, but he was on his side and Louis was on the other side. And they met. Well, Jerry gave him donuts or cannolis as opposed to the New Jersey State Police, who roughed him up a little bit. So Louis sent Jerry a Christmas card, and they started talking, and Jerry helped me, and then Louis called me up.
And something that I think is really interesting is reading this is that state police even or police in general, they had a hard time finding which coins were counterfeit and which ones were real.
Right. The New Jersey State Police detective sent Jerry 4 tokens and said, tell me which one's real and which one isn't. He couldn't tell the difference. And when they finally noticed the inventories at Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun exceeded what they had, they said, well, these aren't rabbits. And they borrowed microscopes from Ledyard High School and still couldn't determine what was what.
So how did the coin get caught?
He loitered at the $100 machines in Atlantic City, where there are many cameras, and he always brought the same girlfriend.
So he would put on costumes, he'd put on disguises, and he'd use these fake coins, fake tokens, but his girlfriend kind of just went as his girlfriend.
Well, she played too, I think.
But that's how they got caught.
Yes.
And so but does anyone really know exactly how much money, like, he could have? I mean, $4 million, this is an estimate,
well,
right?
Jerry estimated that based on a number of factors, including Louis had sent crates exceeding a couple thousand pounds of tokens by mail to Las Vegas, to hotels. And when he got caught in Atlantic City, he had 750 pounds of tokens in his Toyota.
How does Louis fit into the pantheon of sort of like of scams and scam artists and the sort of mafia history that you cover? You're an expert on.
Well, huge. I mean, he was one of the major players. And keep in mind, nowadays, slot machines are electronic. In fact, Andy, I'd love to know where on eBay you could buy some of the coins he made. That would be an interesting find. But yeah, he was, in Las Vegas in those days. Think back to the movie Casino. Joe Pesci played a guy based on a guy named Tony the Ant Spilotro, who was a Chicago outfit street enforcer in Las Vegas. Robert De Niro played somebody based on Frank Lefty Rosenthal, an odds maker who corrupted a lot of sporting events, ran the Stardust and 3 other casinos in Las Vegas. So they skimmed from the count room. Skimming means taking money before it's counted and taxed, and they would disperse that to mob bosses all over the place. Chicago, Kansas City. There was somebody who would take money from downtown Las Vegas by train to South Florida to Meyer Lansky. So whether you had people like Louis the Coin, whether you had people skimming out of the count rooms, Las Vegas was a wide open, crime-filled environment where mobsters and people connected to the mob like Louis the Coin flourished.
Larry, can you remember the first time you started reporting on this or became so like knowledge in Las Vegas?
I really started reporting. So I moved there in the early 80s, and that's when I became a reporter there. But I grew up in Louisiana. It's funny. I'm going back even before I was a reporter, which also is heavily mob influenced, like New England, So you grow up down there. It was the Marcello crime family, Carlos Marcello. So, you just grow up knowing about it. You hear about it. You wonder why these people aren't arrested and prosecuted. I was in the Marine Corps, and, when I went to college, every barracks, every dorm had every bar had somebody who you could book sports bets through illegally, but it was all funneled up to mobsters. And, just knew that. It was out on the streets. Then when I became a reporter, I worked in other cities too before I went to Nevada. It was ingrained in the culture, and those were news stories because you cover in the news business, you cover plane crashes, not safe landings. And so the plane crashes in Nevada, that was the mob. And, that was heavily covered. There was a really famous reporter and a good friend of mine named Jeff Garriman, who was just killed a few years ago. Some reporters really came up and made a name for themselves busting the mob. One was a guy named Ned Day, who had been in Milwaukee and was tied in with the mob, and then came down to Nevada and became a mob reporter and went after them. So it was all part of that culture, but the mob was heavily reported on in the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s. Really, the last big mob murder in Las Vegas was the late 90s, a guy named Fat Herbie Blitzstein, who worked for Tony Spilotro. So, it just was all a part of the culture. It was a part of the coverage. Thus, the Mob Museum today, by the way. That's why it's so big. Everybody wants to know what Las Vegas was like.
Talk to us as well about the modern day mafia, because you said, the last murder was a number of years ago, but the mafia is still around though, isn't it? But just in a different way.
Yeah. So, you got the traditional mob in places like Italy and 'Ndrangheta. You got, Cosa Nostra. They're still involved in things like cocaine trafficking with South American traffickers. But you also have a lot of other, quote, mafias. In fact, just in LA the other day, I think 30 or 40 Mexican mafia members were busted for narcotics trafficking and so forth. A big Canadian was just arrested not long ago and came back up through Los Angeles. So Armenians, Russians, Chinese, you got a lot of different groups now that are involved in organized crime. Everything from stealing gasoline to all the traditional street rackets like illegal sports betting, prostitution, all that is still thriving and still extremely active with different organized crime groups, including the traditional La Cosa Nostra, the Italian mobs.
Ally.
So what's interesting about Louis is he didn't really he was known for counterfeiting, but he did other sorts of crimes. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Louis made silencers for guns, and he used to use Marlboro hard packs for devices where you pushed a button, and if you pushed it 5 times for a quarter, it's $1.25 at a phone booth. You could push it for nickels or dimes. And he couldn't make them fast enough. He sold many hundreds of those.
I mean, the man truly was a genius.
And he had, I mean, part of his skill is he had personality, right? I mean, this guy had a certain charisma about him that seemed to translate to law enforcement or into courts or in with the press, that somehow he was certainly good copy.
He's a charming fellow and very entertaining. He was banned by certified mail from every casino in the United States. And I went to the fights at Twin River in Rhode Island one night, and who ushers me into the VIP room where there's free booze and food but Louis the Coin.
I think, I grew up in Rochester, New York, and the mafia was always part of just something that we thought of, whether it was the public works in the town or how the trash was done, or there's certain restaurants that we kind of knew that this wasn't a restaurant really for us. It's a good one, but not for us. And it was just, so I think probably for this younger generation, they just didn't grow up thinking about organized crime or the mafia as just a player, part of the fabric. I think sort of like what we got, I think in The Wire or something, we get this idea of all these different sort of players that are part of this bigger story that the public are sort of the backdrop for.
Andy, I want to, you mentioned something at the top of the interview. You said that he came to your house with the manuscript. I think it would be interesting for the listeners to understand that the book, although has been edited by you and another co-editor and has been added to, this is a memoir. He came to you with real stories. When you saw those, and Ally raised this actually earlier, so sorry for stealing your question, Ally, how much of it do you think was actually real and some of it was maybe a little bit fantasy?
It's hard to tell, and we have sort of a disclaimer. Some of this really happened, and I dream when I'm awake. But, the feds had a sentencing report that we published, which verifies everything in the book. It's like free advertising via the U.S. attorney. So everything he did with the tokens was real. He melted them down and he re-engineered them. And he even bought raw materials not far from a state police organized crime building in Meriden, Connecticut. And not far from that, right now in a glass case, there's some of Louis' tokens at the Connecticut State Police Museum.
So Andy, was there a moment, I'm not sure how much time you spent with Louis, but was there a moment where you really actually thought, you sort of saw the darker side or something? You thought, this is a guy that maybe that this isn't maybe the nicest person?
Well, not all my friends are angels, but like everybody, there's good and bad in Louis. So he wasn't a pacifist, and he did things in his self-interest, but he had great stories, and he was fun to be with.
Andy, I want to ask you a question because there was a bit again in the book. Apparently, he spent time in prison, did Louis, but during a couple of years in federal prison for his handiwork, he was apparently paid $18,000 by the feds as a consultant.
Well, after he graduated from Fort Dix in New Jersey, which he said was the best 2 years of his life, he was hired by the U.S. Mint as a consultant because his dies lasted longer than their dies.
So he was kind of, there was a certain mechanical genius, or did he get somebody else that he brought in to do this, or did he know how to do this?
He did it all, but he had tool and die makers working for him
in Meriden, Connecticut, Providence.
He bought some raw materials from Meriden.
But he had it done in Providence. They had just like some kind of old school.
He had a big building, and he had tool and die makers working around the clock. He had all kinds of machines, coin comparators, and when he had the finished product, he had a machine that would knock them around so it looked like they were used.
Yes, so it's one of those, and did they ever figure out a way to distinguish them, or were they always just basically perfect?
They were almost perfect. They had to be sent to special labs because even with microscopes, the color, the weight, the composition, the feel, you couldn't tell.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, in this case, I mean, we're it's sort of hard to believe, but right here at the mouth of the Connecticut River, a quiet little town right across the river was a resort that had, I think it had a casino. I think an illegal one, but
it was raided, and our neighbor, the late Skyball Scabelli of Old Saybrook, who ran Springfield in cooperation with Raymond Patriarca and the New York family, was Louis's traveling companion when they'd go on free junkets to Las Vegas and have a blank check to be happy criminals at the dunes.
But Frank Sinatra would come
with Mia Farrow in his boat.
Yeah, come right to Old Saybrook gambling. Maybe that's part of the reason why we've been trying to crack the nut that is the Old Saybrook Police Department for the last. There were only 2 police chiefs for 56 years, I think. So certainly they knew a thing or two about this.
Yeah, maybe they would pretend they didn't know Skyball Scabelli.
Andy, so he made counterfeit coins not just for legal casinos, but for illegal casinos too, right?
Well, Jerry Longo said he documented at least 35 different casinos that Louis made chips for.
Wow.
So he had to have probably a different, unless they use the same material for all the different casinos, he probably had to have a different mix or something.
Yeah, different molds.
But even the material that he created the chips out of.
And in Las Vegas, there had been a prior counterfeiting ring to when Louis got busted. So all the guys making a few $100,000, ex-federal agents, pretending Louis didn't happen in Nevada. But he was arrested in Atlantic City, and he had to make deals in Connecticut. One of his lawyers was former Rhode Island Attorney General Jimmy O'Neill. In Connecticut, he had a well-respected genial lawyer named Mel Scott.
So how long did he have to spend in jail for this scam in total?
2 years in Fort Dix, New Jersey. And he eventually moved up to an air quote suite with the Pizza Connection guys, the heroin dealers from Sicily. And they had the best food. They would stage fights in the kitchen and then, steal all the best food and take it back to their headquarters.
Larry, I just want to pick up on the organized crime aspect a little bit more with you. I don't know if we as individuals realize there is so much of it still around. I mean, I think we went through a period, not just here in the US, but, elsewhere in the world where the media perhaps reported a little bit more on it and there were more headlines. We don't seem to see the same headlines as much, but, from listening to what you're saying, there's still plenty of it going about.
Yeah, keep in mind, we just had a case where, some NBA players, some mobsters in New York were involved in some rigged poker games and some rigged basketball games. It still makes headlines. It still exists. It's still very active, not just the traditional Cosa Nostra, but a lot of organized crime still exists, and including in places like Las Vegas. A lot of it is the street rackets. It's harder to get into the count rooms and skim money. It's harder for people like Louis the Coin to show up with counterfeit devices to steal from casinos, but it still is extremely, anywhere there's money, especially in narcotics, prostitution, street rackets, illegal sports betting, like in California. You can't go into a bar in LA and not find a bartender who can't book a bet for you, even though sports betting is technically illegal in California. Anywhere there's money, there's going to be organized crime that will get a piece of it.
It's the $64 million question, excuse the pun, but do you think we'll ever see somebody like Louis again,
In different endeavors, it's happening to this day. Yeah, there are illegal casinos all over LA. To this day, there's a lot of, gangsters, mobsters, whatever you want to call them, who are profiting heavily profiting off of organized crime efforts. So there's, George Anastasia, a mob writer, once told me, we'll find out a lot of the stuff that came out about the traditional mob that became a part of the movie Casino and things like that are because of court cases. And as you know, when things go to court, the court transcript becomes public record. A lot of people didn't know about a lot of this until a lot of these trials occurred. And what George Anastasia told me is that, 10, 15 years from now, when other court cases develop from current organized crime endeavors, we're going to have a whole new sphere of understanding of what's happening right now with organized crime.
I think, one thing that we were looking at was March Madness. And the issue, we were up at UConn talking to students, asking them about gambling and their gambling habits and their sports gambling habits. And one of the figures we heard was that roughly there was $3 to $4 billion legally bet on March Madness or the games around that, but that there was in total they were estimating roughly $12 billion gambled on this sports event. So that would be like $9 billion additional, and some of that might be just like office pools or other things, but some of it are these sort of illegal venues that you're talking about, or these illegal sports books.
Yeah, a lot of it is offshore. Here's the thing. I'm a proponent for legal sports betting. A lot of the things that are happening now where athletes are getting busted, a quarterback at Texas Tech entered rehab the other day because he got busted for illegal sports betting. A lot of it wouldn't be uncovered if it weren't for legal sports betting, because they have integrity compliance companies that monitor betting that could indicate some illegality. So a lot of the stuff that's coming out now wouldn't have come out in the old days. A lot of that illegal sports betting and things like that happened all the time. Rigged games, rigged horse races, rigged boxing matches. Those things have always happened and always have been controlled by the mob. But now we're finding out more about it because of people getting caught because they bet legally, and those betting irregularities show up. Like the guy the other day who got the staff sergeant who got busted for a prediction market bet on whether Maduro was going to be captured in Venezuela, because he was in on the inside on when that was going to happen. So those things are exposed now because of the legal market. It's like Nicholas Pileggi told me one time, the guy who wrote Goodfellas, and he wrote the book, and then he co-wrote the movie with Martin Scorsese, the director. And he also wrote Casino, the book, and co-wrote the movie with Martin Scorsese. It's better that the government is monitoring betting and getting the tax dollars from it than it is gangsters. When the gangsters were doing it, we had no idea whatsoever what was going on under the table. Now we have a better feel for it, and it's taxed, so there are some benefits to society, education, infrastructure, things like that. But prediction markets, one of the current discussions about it now, DraftKings, FanDuel, by the way, the two biggest legal sports bet books in the U.S., online sports books, and they also have some brick and mortar places. Those two are also now in the prediction market game. And there are a lot of discussions right now in Washington about how do we get a better handle on controlling some things that are like that staff sergeant. How do we get a better handle on some of the things that could be happening that are manipulating the markets? But if it weren't for the legal aspect of it, we wouldn't know any of this.
I think one thing that we've looked at here is also how international. I think you touched on that a little bit, but at Mohegan Sun here in Connecticut, there are 23 customer representatives just aimed at Asian customers working in Mohegan Sun there for different, Filipino customers, Chinese customers, all this, just how international that market is. And it makes it all the harder to track or all the more ripe for all the things money laundering or organized crime, if not in America, then someplace else.
Larry, it's been fascinating talking to you, and also Andy as well. Thank you for coming in. And of course, the book again will mention You Thought It Was More: New Adventures of the World's Greatest Counterfeiter. My thanks to Greg, Ally, Andy, and Larry. Don't forget to check out the digital pages of cityexaminer.com for more stories and our events calendar for all the latest local happenings. And while you're there, why not subscribe to make sure you don't miss out on all the week's news? It's just $20 for the year. Keep it legal, please. This is City Examiner Weekly, reporting and supporting what matters. I'm Brian Scott Smith. Thanks for listening.